What was going on this weekend in the beta of the War Within wasn't just the Mythic Plus testing or the Raid testing, but also the testing for what is going to be the other Endgame Pillar to be added in the upcoming expansion. We are talking about the Delve system. Yes, because the Delve system is going to be joining your raids, your PvP, your mythic dungeon as part of your weekly rewards, even inside of the Great Vault. It is going to have currencies tied to it, it is going to have coffer keys you can buy so that you can get more rewards at the end of a successful delve. You have a companion to customize inside of the Delve system, and this is also a special one because it is also meant to be played solo. Yes, the mode can be done upwards with 5 players, but also as a completely solo activity. Now, for the sake of testing, I went through all of the different tiers of delves all the way to the hardest one. Initially, the first 4 are going to be essentially the questing delves you get to do in the 4 different tiers, and then as you keep going higher and higher, that's where the item level requirements will start rising higher and higher down to what practically is mythic raiding, heroic raiding type of item level. This is part of the endgame system because it also gives you things like crests as part of your rewards, as well as high item level gear, comparatively to things like, world quest rewards, for example. Now, we don't know many more details about how all of this is going to work. Is this going to be spammable? Is this going to be on a weekly lockout, a daily lockout? How many delves can you do per day? If you can do multiples per day, can you keep farming crests infinitely inside of the delves, for example? All of these things are not completely fleshed out, but we do know the general idea behind this. For starters, the higher you go in the tiers, the more of the difficulty will increase, very similar to Mythic Plus. The health and damage of the enemies inside the delve will keep rising the higher you go. The influence of what is supposed to be the big end boss of the delve system, Zekvir, will become more and more severe. This very simply means there are going to be some tougher mobs inside of the delves, the more of these stacks you have, and then the special, let's just say, affix of the delve, which will have usually some extra annoying feature inside the delve, which will frustrate you as you try to dodge it. Now, what happens when you enter the delve is, of course, the first thing that is going to be dealing with your follower. Now, for now, there is one follower available, which is just Brann. I'm sure that as we go deeper in the expansion, we're going to have more followers available, but for now, Brann is all we have. Now, this is not just a testing thing, it's a confirmed thing. The only roles available for Brann are DPS or healer. There's no plan for now to have a tank version of Brann. Now, Brann also has a level. The more you level Brann, the more you unlock all of his different abilities, and then you have the stacking power increase of Brann, practically just make him, 15% stronger the more you go past level 10. As you keep leveling him up over level 10, he just gets this infinitely stacking power level. The rest of the things are unlocked in the first 10 levels. What is also unlocked are a bunch of curios you can find in the delves. The curios you can use to unlock the powers you can then give to Brann inside of a delve. You can see here the rank is also based on how many curios of said ability you have collected. Some of these are quite unique and niche, like for example being able to jump on top of Brann so he launches you towards an enemy to do damage, or something like Brann preparing to fire a massive shot in your direction and doing damage to the first enemy it connects with, or something much more simple and straightforward like, passive absorb shield cast on you every once in a while, for example. Those are the options you have when going after your setup of your follower. A couple of special effects and the role. Now, as for the delve itself, since many of you right now are playing, presumably, WoW Remix, it's very similar to a scenario. You're gonna have to complete a couple of tasks, like, free some prisoners, destroy some totems, or find some treasures, and then after a couple of these tasks have been completed, defeat the boss of the delve. Inside of the delve, there are also going to be some Torghast-esque powers you can find. Generally speaking, you can find them from treasure, from caches, or Brann himself has the ability to uncover hidden treasures. And those can range from being decent power-ups to being completely useless to being very powerful. Some have negative effects, like gaining massive amount of damage and massive amount of health, but all of that is lost if you drop below a certain amount of HP. Many powers can be completely lost if you die, for example. You can gain more resources, more currency at the end of a delve, the more of these Zekvir's empowered enemies you can defeat, which is of course an extra because these empowered enemies are also going to be tougher. They're going to be more dangerous to defeat, so it's up to you. Not anything in here has to be defeated. You can pretty much skip many/most of the mobs. There is no mythic plus trash counter in this difficulty. If you are able to skip something that is not required by your quest, then technically you can. You could go for an almost full pacifist run on a hunter, just running through, collecting things and feign deathing your way through, while avoiding to kill anything until you reach the last boss, in which case, I'm afraid, you will have to get your hands bloody and actually kill someone, but you can skip a lot of things in a delve if you want to. Now let's talk about the obvious thing though, which is the difficulty, because of course, this is a mode which works for everyone. And if it works for everyone, it means it has to work for a healer, it has to work for a DPS, and it has to work for a tank. Now, this might not surprise players, but indeed the easiest role to complete this with is a tank. That is by far the easiest role. You can set Brann to be your healer and be even more tanky, or very simply, more easily, you can set Brann to be your DPS. The problem really when it comes to being a DPS or a healer is the massive amount of damage you are taking from these mobs. The flow of the damage you are taking is very reminiscent of WoW Remix scaling problems. You know, sometimes you're pulling a mob, it's doing 10% of your HP, then you pull another mob, you might even think it's the same mob you just pulled, and now he hits you for 70% of your HP out of nowhere. Your HP, especially as a DPS in here, is basically like the HP of a Blood Death Knight in a Mythic Plus key. You're going to be yo-yoing a lot of health inside of these delves as a DPS. Now, also, I'm afraid to say there is a clear advantage in here if you play DPS for the ranged DPS because of the kiting advantage. The vast majority of the mobs in here do not have many kinds of kite prevention. They don't have many charges, many leaps. They don't stop chasing you to start casting things if you start running around. So it's also easier for a caster, for example a frost mage, to just comfortably run in circles and perma-freeze enemies, for example, to avoid taking damage in the first place. Meanwhile, a melee DPS has a much harder time and will have to be slapped in the face very often if they want to do damage. So they have to act like a tank without actually being a tank. This gets even harder on certain big mobs, elites or rares, which cannot be stunned or crowd controlled fully, so it's even harder to try to dodge around and kite around these type of mobs. So the DPS do have a bit of an harder time compared to a tank, and then healers as well. This might come down to, I'm sorry, no shame in this, my dear friend, to Brann being a bit too underwhelming at the moment. We already had a blue post from Blizzard pointing out, of course, they are listening to the feedback, especially one of the more requested ones was to actually make Brann a little bit stronger, which is what likely needs to happen. His healer version in particular, it seems to be a bit underwhelming. He loses a lot of damage to become a healer, but his healing powers are not that great, especially for a DPS who requires quite a bit more healing than a tank due to the damage he's taking, and Brann not doing too much if he's spec'd as healer. You know, spec'ing Brann as a healer to gain something like the emergency supplies. When you drop below 30% HP, you are healed for 25% of your maximum health on a 3-minute cooldown is terrible. You know, this is terrible even for a talent on a spec, let alone for your follower who is supposed to be an actual healer in your delve. Even something like the Dwarven Medicine at the moment, which is just a potion dropped on the ground that you can run over to get healed by, stacked at its full stacks, which is 3, is 220,000 healing every second, which is about 4% of your max HP healed per second. You know, when you're a DPS and you can get chunked for 30 to 40% of your max HP per hit, having a healer healing you for 4% of your max HP per second doesn't do squat. So at the moment you do have a slight problem of imbalance towards tanks being more powerful in this game mode due to very simply being more durable and benefiting more from Brann being a DPS, as opposed to the opposite, where DPS in this mode are squishier, they have a harder time staying alive, it's also harder for the melee DPS to stay alive, while also the healer version of Brann is a bit too weak at the moment. As far as the activity itself, it is pretty good considering it starts with a dozen different delves available, basically. It does stimulate or open up perhaps a bit more options in your talent tree, so you gain more value to having a more Mythic Plus-esque type of talents where things like CC, crowd control, becomes more valuable, of course, because now you're on your own. So you cannot get bailed out by a Vengeance Demon Hunter crowd controlling everything for you. You actually have to come up with some things that might help you in this delve. Keep enemies silenced or interrupted or stunned or slowed if you have the range to kite them around, for example. That can gain more value. Also, because you're alone, you can start thinking about stuff you don't need in a group, like you don't need the extra Blessing of Freedom to bless someone. You also don't really need Blessing of Sacrifice because you have nobody to sacrifice in here. At the same time, getting a much better steed has more value in here because of the kiting you might have to do, for example, which is not nearly as needed in a Mythic Plus key. So it does offer a few more options on changing your talents or perhaps playing talents you wouldn't normally play in either the Raid or Mythic Plus or even PvP. That's the other possible positive. Maybe even different hero talents in the delve if they are better for solo play compared to the other activities you might be into. The one thing besides the positiveness that might make people a bit more bummed is that at the moment there is indeed a death counter. The death counter at the moment serves the purpose of allowing you to get your rewards only if you actually finish the delve within the death counter limit. This is meant to be similar to having a timer in Mythic Plus in the sense that only if you beat the Mythic Plus key within the timer you can then go to the level higher of Mythic Plus. This is the same. If you are in a delve level 9, if you want to get into a delve level 10, you have to finish the delve within the death limit counter, or otherwise it won't count as a successful delve. You know, this is mostly relevant for the high end, the high level of the delves, the last couple of levels. You know, early on it won't be nearly as relevant, plus you're likely going to die anyways as you're testing out the delve for the first time or a new delve for the first time. So once you have completed it once, even if you failed, it's likely that on your second try it will be much more easy and you will have an easier understanding of what are the dangerous mobs or the mechanics of certain mobs, etc, etc. So even with a death counter, it shouldn't be that big of an issue in the early levels. In the later levels, it might break some of your delves if they are too difficult. But since the last couple of levels are supposed to be only for the completionists, only for the pushers, then it feels like the added level of competitiveness makes sense. After all, those last couple of levels are for the players who want the special mount, the special title, the achievements, the meta achievement, etc, etc. So it does feel in line, adding extra difficulty if you want the better kind of rewards. That seems like it might be the only one kind of, complaint or annoyance players might have about the death counter being present in the delve system. Overall, it is a pretty positive experience in terms of testing. It is quite nice. We still don't know, as mentioned, many of the details about the amount of rewards and how often you can gain these rewards from the delves, but the first impression has been very positive. Besides the general unbalancedness of the power of the tank compared to the other two roles and the underwhelmingness of Brann as a follower. Still though, plenty of time to fix many of these issues when it comes to delves, which seems to be a pretty nice addition to the endgame content, especially for solo players interested in this type of activity. So for today, this is all we have to point out on this Saturday with our recap of how the delve system seems to be going in the beta of The War Within. Now, with this out of the way, we are now saying goodbyes to each other, thanking as usual everyone who is supporting for free by doing things like liking and commenting down below on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I still don't understand. Why do people start making house renovation works at 8 in the morning? Like, why?